A midnight airport. Two pilots collapse from food poisoning. 279 passengers trapped at 30,000 feet with nobody to land the plane. Then a janitor steps forward from the shadows. Nobody believes him. Nobody trusts him. But he holds a secret from his past that could save everyone or doom them all. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The overhead lights of Terminal 3 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport buzzed softly as Marcus Webb pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridor at 2 a.m. on a cold December morning. His blue janitor uniform was faded from years of washing, and his name tag hung slightly crooked on his chest. At 58 years old, Marcus had been cleaning airports for the past 7 years, mopping floors and emptying trash bins while thousands of travelers passed by without noticing him. His hands were rough from years of work, and his back ached from bending over to scrub floors, but he showed up every night without complaint because this job paid his bills and kept food on the table for his small apartment in the south side of Chicago. What nobody knew, not his supervisor, not his co-workers, and certainly not the passengers who walked past him without a second glance, was that Marcus Webb had once been Captain Marcus Webb of the United States Air Force. He had flown fighter jets for 15 years, accumulating over 3,000 hours of flight time in F-16s and F-18s. He had served 2 tours overseas, received commendations for his service, and trained dozens of younger pilots in advanced flying techniques. But that life had ended abruptly when his wife Maria died in a car accident, leaving him alone with depression so severe that he could barely function. The military had discharged him honorably when his performance declined, and by the time he recovered enough to think about flying again, he was too old and too broken to be hired by commercial airlines who wanted younger pilots with recent experience. So Marcus became invisible, another aging man in a janitor uniform, cleaning the very airports where planes took off and landed every day, a cruel reminder of what he had lost. He would sometimes pause near the windows and watch aircraft taxi and depart, feeling a deep ache in his chest for the life he once lived in the sky. But mostly he kept his head down, pushed his cart, and tried not to think about the past. Tonight was like any other night. Marcus cleaned the gate areas, emptied trash cans, and wiped down surfaces in the empty terminal. Around 3 a.m., he was finishing up near Gate B-17 when he heard an announcement over the public address system. There was a medical emergency on Transglobal Airlines Flight 2847, which was scheduled to depart at 3:30 a.m. for London. The flight was boarding early, and medical personnel were being called to the gate. Marcus paid little attention. Medical emergencies happen sometimes, and it was not his concern. He pushed his cart toward the next gate. But as he passed Gate B-17, he saw unusual activity. Several airline staff members were talking urgently on their radios, and a gate agent looked extremely worried. Marcus slowed down, his old instincts making him pay attention. He heard fragments of conversation that made his blood run cold. Both pilots are sick, violent food poisoning, they ate at the same restaurant, we need replacements immediately. There are no available pilots in Chicago right now, everyone is either in the air or at minimum rest. The passengers are already boarding. 279 people, we cannot cancel now. London operations needs this aircraft. Marcus stopped his cart and stood near the wall, listening carefully. His heart began to beat faster as he understood the situation. Transglobal Flight 2847 had 2 pilots who were severely ill from food poisoning. They had eaten contaminated food at a restaurant near their hotel and were currently in the bathroom, unable to function. The airline was desperately trying to find replacement pilots, but at 3 a.m., there were no available pilots anywhere near Chicago. All reserve pilots were either already flying or legally required to rest between shifts. The gate supervisor, a stressed woman named Patricia Chen, was on the phone with operations, her voice rising in panic. I understand the regulations, but we have 279 passengers already boarding. We cannot just cancel the flight. Find me pilots. Call anyone. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. He knew what he should do, but fear gripped him. He had not flown an aircraft in 7 years. His license had expired. He was just a janitor now, and nobody would believe him even if he offered to help. But 279 lives were at stake, and his training, buried deep under years of depression and manual labor, suddenly surged to the surface like a drowning man gasping for air. He pushed his cart to the side and walked slowly toward the gate desk. His hands were shaking. Patricia Chen was still on the phone, arguing with someone at operations. Marcus waited until she hung up, then cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am." Patricia looked at him with barely concealed irritation. She saw only a janitor interrupting her crisis. "Not now, please. We have an emergency situation." Marcus spoke quietly but clearly. "I know. I heard. Your pilots are sick and you need replacements." "Yes, and unless you know any pilot standing around at 3 a.m., I do not have time to talk." Her voice was sharp with stress. Marcus took a deep breath. "I am a pilot. Or I was. Air Force. 15 years. F-16s and F-18s. I can fly your plane." Patricia stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. Her eyes traveled from his janitor uniform to his worn shoes to his cleaning cart parked against the wall. "This is not funny. I do not have time for jokes." "I am not joking, ma'am." Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out his military ID card, old and faded but still valid for identification. "Captain Marcus Webb, United States Air Force, retired. I have over 3,000 hours of flight time. I know I do not look like much right now, but I can fly that aircraft. I can get those people safely to London." Patricia took the ID card with trembling hands and stared at it. Her mind was clearly struggling to reconcile the janitor standing before her with the credentials he claimed. "But, you clean floors, you are not current, your license." "My license expired, yes. But I still remember how to fly. Every procedure, every system, every emergency protocol. It does not go away. I watch planes every day and I remember everything." Marcus spoke with growing confidence, his old command voice emerging from years of silence. "Ma'am, you have 279 passengers who need to get to London. You have no other options at 3 a.m. I can do this. I know I can." Patricia looked at the boarding gate, where passengers were settling into their seats, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding. She looked at her phone, where operations had just sent a message saying no replacement pilots would be available for at least 6 hours. She looked back at Marcus, at his weathered face and rough hands and janitor uniform, and made a decision that would either save or doom 279 lives. "Wait here." She grabbed her radio and called for the chief pilot on duty at O'Hare. Within 5 minutes, a tired-looking man in a pilot uniform arrived at the gate. His name was Captain Raymond Pierce, and he was the senior transglobal pilot responsible for operations at O'Hare that night. Patricia quickly explained the situation, and Captain Pierce looked at Marcus with deep skepticism. "You are telling me you are a military pilot working as a janitor, and you want to fly a Boeing 787 across the Atlantic Ocean?" "Yes, sir." Marcus stood straighter, his military bearings suddenly visible despite his humble uniform. "I know it sounds impossible, but I have the training and experience. Fighter jets are different from commercial aircraft, but the principles are the same. I can read the instruments, follow the procedures, and land that plane safely. I just need someone to walk me through the specific systems of the 787, and I can do it." Captain Pierce studied Marcus for a long moment. He saw something in the janitor's eyes, something that reminded him of the pilots he had served with in his own military days before joining commercial aviation. It was the look of someone who had once commanded sophisticated machines in life-or-death situations. Against all logic and regulation, Captain Pierce made a decision. "This is completely irregular and probably illegal. But we have no other choice. Come with me." He turned to Patricia. "Delay boarding for 15 minutes. Tell the passengers there is a minor technical issue. Do not mention the pilot situation. Captain Pierce led Marcus onto Flight 2847 and into the cockpit of the Boeing 787. The flight deck was dark and quiet, filled with digital displays and sophisticated controls that were far more advanced than the fighter jets Marcus had flown. But the basic layout was familiar: primary flight displays, navigation systems, throttle controls, and the yoke that controlled the aircraft's movement through the sky. "This is the 787 flight deck," Pierce began, speaking rapidly. "It is a fly-by-wire system, meaning your control inputs go through computers. These are the primary flight displays, showing altitude, airspeed, heading, and vertical speed. This is the flight management system where the route is programmed. The autopilot controls are here. The aircraft is already programmed to fly to London Heathrow. Your job is to taxi the aircraft, take off, monitor the autopilot during cruise, and land at Heathrow. Can you do that?" Marcus's hands moved over the controls, not touching but hovering, remembering. "Yes, sir. Walk me through the startup sequence and takeoff procedure." For the next 12 minutes, Captain Pierce gave Marcus the fastest crash course in Boeing 787 operations ever conducted. He explained the engine start procedure, the taxi controls, the flap settings for takeoff, the rotation speed, and the climb profile. He showed Marcus how to engage the autopilot and how to communicate with air traffic control. He explained the approach and landing procedures for Heathrow Airport. It was an absurdly brief training session for an aircraft as complex as the 787, but Marcus absorbed every word, his military training allowing him to process information quickly and file it away in the systematic way pilots think. "You will not be alone," Pierce finally said. "I am coming with you as co-pilot. I cannot let you do this alone, and we need someone current to handle communications and back you up. Officially, I am the captain and you are, well, we will figure out the paperwork later if we survive." Marcus felt overwhelming relief. "Thank you, sir. Do not thank me yet. If this goes wrong, we both lose everything. If it goes right, you might get your life back. Now let us get these people to London before they realize their captain is a janitor." The two men settled into the cockpit seats. Pierce took the right seat and Marcus took the left seat, the captain's seat, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders for the first time in 7 years. His hands found the controls naturally, muscle memory awakening from its long sleep. The overhead panel, the center console, the throttle quadrant, everything was where his instincts expected it to be. Patricia's voice came through the intercom. "Cockpit, we are ready for departure. Passengers are all seated. Do we have a go?" Pierce looked at Marcus, giving him one final chance to back out. Marcus nodded firmly. Pierce keyed the intercom. "We have a go. Close the door and prepare for departure." The cabin door sealed with a solid thunk, and Flight 2847 was committed. Marcus began the checklist Pierce had given him, calling out items and flipping switches to start the engines. The massive turbofan spooled up with a deep rumble that Marcus felt through the airframe, and he smiled despite his nervousness. He had missed that sound more than he realized. "Chicago ground, Transglobal 2847 ready to taxi, Gate B17, Pierce called on the radio, handling communications while Marcus focused on controlling the aircraft. "Transglobal 2847, Chicago ground, taxi to runway 28 right via taxiway Alpha and Charlie." Marcus released the parking brake and gently pushed the throttles forward, feeling the massive aircraft begin to roll. The 787 responded smoothly to his inputs, and he steered it carefully along the taxiway using the tiller control, following the painted yellow lines visible in the aircraft's lights. Behind him, 279 passengers sat in their seats, reading magazines, watching movies, or trying to sleep, completely unaware that their captain had been mopping floors an hour ago. The taxi to the runway took 8 minutes, and Marcus used every second to familiarize himself with how the aircraft handled on the ground. It was much heavier and slower than his fighter jets, but the principles were the same. Pierce walked him through the final preparations, setting flaps for takeoff, verifying the flight management computer, and configuring the autopilot. Chicago Tower, Transglobal 2847 holding short runway 28 right, ready for departure, Pierce called. Transglobal 2847, Chicago Tower, wind 290 at 12 knots, runway 28 right, cleared for takeoff. Marcus taxied onto the runway and aligned the nose with the centerline. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was the moment. 7 years of loss and pain and obscurity had led to this impossible chance at redemption. He could not fail. Those 279 people behind him, sleeping or reading or texting their loved ones, had placed their lives in his hands without knowing it, and he would not let them down. Throttles to takeoff power, Pierce said calmly. Marcus pushed the throttles forward smoothly. The engines roared to full power, and the Boeing 787 accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, the centerline lights blurring beneath them. Marcus kept the nose aligned perfectly with gentle rudder inputs, his eyes scanning the instruments exactly as he had done thousands of times before. V1, Pierce called out, indicating they were committed to takeoff. Rotate. At the precise moment, Marcus pulled back gently on the yoke, and the nose lifted. The main landing gear left the ground, and Flight 2847 was airborne. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of flight, the moment when the aircraft transitions from a ground vehicle to a creature of the sky, and tears suddenly blurred his vision. He blinked them away quickly and focused on flying. Positive rate, gear up, Pierce said. Marcus raised the landing gear lever, and the heavy wheels folded into the fuselage. The aircraft climbed smoothly into the dark December sky, leaving Chicago behind. Marcus followed the flight director guidance on his display, making small corrections to maintain the proper climb profile. At 10,000 feet, Pierce engaged the autopilot, and the computer took over, following the programmed route toward London. Marcus sat back in his seat, his hands still resting lightly on the controls, monitoring everything. The aircraft was flying itself now, following a route programmed into its computers, but Marcus watched every system, every gauge, every indication, ready to take control if anything went wrong. Beside him, Pierce visibly relaxed. That was a good takeoff, Pierce said quietly. You have not lost your touch. Thank you, sir. I was terrified. Terror is normal. What matters is you did not let it control you. Now we have 6 hours to get to London. The autopilot will do most of the work, but you need to monitor everything and be ready for the approach and landing. That is where this gets hard. The flight across the country and over the Atlantic Ocean was the longest 6 hours of Marcus's life. He sat in the captain's seat, watching the instruments and the dark sky outside, while Pierce handled communications with air traffic control and explained additional systems when necessary. The passengers behind them slept or watched movies, completely unaware of the unusual circumstances in the cockpit. Around hour 3, a flight attendant came to the cockpit with coffee and sandwiches. She was a young woman named Emily, and she looked at Marcus with mild curiosity. His janitor uniform was still visible under the captain's jacket Pierce had found for him, and his name tag still said, Marcus Webb, Maintenance. Are you new? She asked politely. I have not seen you on transglobal flights before. Pierce answered smoothly. Captain Webb is filling in from another airline. Emergency substitution. Long story. Emily smiled and left, and Marcus exhaled with relief. Pierce looked at him seriously. When we land, there will be questions. Many questions. But right now, focus on flying. That is all that matters. As dawn broke over the Atlantic Ocean, Marcus watched the sun rise from 37,000 feet, painting the clouds below in shades of pink and gold. He had forgotten how beautiful it was to see the world from this height, to exist in the space between earth and sky where humans were never meant to be but had learned to go anyway. He thought about Maria, about how proud she would be to see him in this seat again, and he silently promised her that he would not waste this second chance. Transglobal 2847, London Control, descend and maintain flight level 280, the radio crackled with a British accent. London Control, Transglobal 2847, descending to flight level 280, Pierce responded. Marcus disengaged the autopilot and took manual control of the aircraft. It was time to bring Flight 2847 down from cruise altitude and prepare for landing at London Heathrow Airport. Pierce talked him through the descent procedures, and Marcus followed them precisely, reducing power and lowering the nose to begin the long descent toward England. The approach to Heathrow was complex, with multiple altitude restrictions and speed requirements as the aircraft navigated through one of the busiest airspaces in the world. Pierce handled the radios while Marcus flew the aircraft, following the instructions from air traffic control and configuring the plane for landing. At 10,000 feet, he extended the flaps partially. At 5,000 feet, he lowered the landing gear, feeling the drag increase as the heavy wheels extended into the slipstream. Transglobal 2847, you are cleared to land runway 27 left, wind 250 at 15 knots, London Tower called. Cleared to land runway 27 left, Transglobal 2847, Pierce acknowledged. Marcus aligned the aircraft with the runway, visible now in the distance as a long strip of concrete stretching toward them. He adjusted power to maintain the proper glide slope, making small corrections as crosswinds pushed the aircraft slightly off course. His hands and feet worked the controls smoothly, making constant tiny adjustments that kept the approach stable and precise. At 500 feet above the ground, the aircraft's automated voice called out, 500. At 50 feet, Marcus began the landing flare, pulling back gently on the yoke to raise the nose and slow the descent rate. The main landing gear touched the runway with a barely perceptible bump, and Marcus immediately deployed the thrust reversers and applied the brakes. The Boeing 787 decelerated rapidly, and Marcus steered it down the centerline with confident inputs until it slowed to taxi speed. Transglobal 2847, exit runway at taxiway Mike 4 and contact ground on 121.9, the tower called. Pierce switched frequencies and received taxi instructions to the gate. Marcus steered the aircraft carefully through Heathrow's complex network of taxiways, following the painted lines and signs until they reached their assigned gate at Terminal 5. He set the parking brake and began the engine shutdown procedure Pierce guided him through. In the cabin behind them, passengers were gathering their belongings, completely unaware that they had just been part of aviation history. Marcus sat in the captain's seat, exhausted and exhilarated, as ground crew positioned the jet bridge and connected it to the aircraft door. Pierce looked at Marcus with respect and something like awe. That was an excellent landing. Smooth and right on centerline. You flew this aircraft like you have been flying 787s for years instead of one flight. Thank you, sir. I could not have done it without your help. Maybe, but you did the flying. Now comes the hard part. Explaining this to management. The passengers deplaned normally, thanking the flight attendants and heading into the terminal to collect their baggage. None of them knew that their captain had been a janitor 10 hours earlier, and Marcus preferred it that way. He remained in the cockpit while Pierce went to speak with Transglobal's London operations manager. The discussion that followed was intense. The London manager, a stern man named Richard Holloway, was initially furious that an unlicensed janitor had flown a commercial aircraft across the Atlantic with 279 passengers aboard. But Pierce defended Marcus passionately, pointing out that there had been no other option and that Marcus had performed flawlessly. They pulled the flight data recorder information, which showed that Marcus's flying had been precise and professional, and they listened to the cockpit voice recordings, which demonstrated his competence and calm decision-making. Eventually, Richard Holloway made a call to Transglobal's headquarters in Atlanta. The executives were stunned by what had happened, but they could not deny the results. Flight 2847 had arrived safely and on time. No passengers had been harmed. The alternative would have been canceling the flight and stranding 279 people in Chicago, creating a public relations nightmare and massive costs. Marcus was called into the office where the discussions were happening. He still wore his janitor uniform under Pierce's borrowed jacket, and he stood before these men in their expensive suits feeling very small and out of place. Richard Holloway spoke first. "Mr. Webb, what you did was highly irregular and technically illegal. You could have killed 279 people." "Yes, sir. But I did not. I brought them here safely." "Why did you not tell anyone you were a pilot? Why were you working as a janitor if you have 3,000 hours of military flight time?" Marcus took a deep breath and told them his story. He explained about Maria's death, his depression, his discharge from the Air Force, and his inability to find work as a commercial pilot because of his age and expired credentials. He told them about 7 years of pushing a mop and emptying trash cans in the same airports where he had once dreamed of flying. He told them about the pain of watching planes take off every day, knowing he would never be in a cockpit again. When he finished, the room was silent. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice softer. "I understand. I am sorry for your loss and your struggles. But you put this company at enormous risk." Captain Pierce interrupted. "He also saved this company from a disaster. Canceling that flight would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and damaged Transglobal's reputation. Instead, the flight operated normally. Marcus broke rules, yes, but he did it to help people. That should count for something." Another long silence followed. Finally, Richard made a decision. "Mr. Webb, Transglobal Airlines would like to offer you a position in our pilot training program. We will pay for your medical examinations, your license renewal, and your type rating on the Boeing 787. In 6 months, if you complete the training successfully, you will be a first officer on our international routes. We are short on pilots, and clearly, you have the skills we need. Are you interested?" Marcus could not speak. Tears ran down his weathered face, and he nodded silently, unable to believe what he was hearing. After 7 years of darkness, a door had opened, and light was flooding in. The months that followed were intense. Marcus underwent full medical examinations, which cleared him completely for flight duty. He completed ground school, learning the Boeing 787 systems in detail rather than the rushed crash course Pierce had given him. He flew dozens of hours in simulators, practicing every possible scenario until his skills were sharp and current. He studied regulations, procedures, and company policies until he could recite them in his sleep. 6 months after that impossible night, Marcus Webb sat in the right seat of a Transglobal Boeing 787 as a fully qualified and licensed first officer. His uniform was crisp and professional, with the 3 stripes of a first officer on his shoulders. He was no longer invisible. Passengers and co-workers treated him with the respect his position commanded. He was a pilot again. Captain Pierce, who had taken Marcus under his wing and mentored him through his training, was the captain on Marcus's first official flight. As they pushed back from the gate at Chicago O'Hare, Pierce looked over at Marcus and smiled. "How does it feel to be back?" Marcus looked around the cockpit, at the instruments and controls that had become familiar again, and smiled. "It feels like coming home." The story of how a janitor saved 279 lives at 30,000 feet spread through Transglobal Airlines and eventually to the wider aviation community. It became a legend, a reminder that talent and skill can be hidden in the most unlikely places, and that people deserve second chances regardless of what uniform they wear or what circumstances forced them into humble positions. Marcus flew for Transglobal for another 12 years before retiring, having trained dozens of younger pilots. He never forgot those 7 years pushing a mop, and he treated every janitor and service worker with deep respect, because he knew everyone had a story and everyone deserved dignity. On the 10th anniversary of Flight 2847, many passengers gathered to thank Marcus personally. One businessman told him, "You taught me to never judge people by their job. You changed how I see the world." Marcus accepted their thanks with humility. That night had saved him as much as it had saved those 279 passengers. It had given him back his identity and purpose, reminding him that skills never truly disappear and that courage means stepping forward even when wearing a janitor's uniform. Years later, Marcus wrote a book about his experience that inspired thousands of people trapped in jobs beneath their qualifications. He established a foundation helping former military pilots transition to commercial aviation, personally mentoring many of them. The Boeing 787 that had been Flight 2847 was eventually donated to an aviation museum with Marcus's janitor uniform displayed beside a captain's uniform, showing his incredible journey. Children visiting learned about the janitor who became a hero, teaching them never to judge people by appearance. Marcus Webb died peacefully at 82, having lived a meaningful second act. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including many of the 279 passengers he had saved. Transglobal sent aircraft to fly over in tribute, and every pilot was someone Marcus had inspired. His gravestone read, Captain Marcus Webb, fighter pilot, janitor, commercial pilot, hero, worth is not measured by uniform but by character. The story continues to remind everyone that second chances are possible, that circumstances do not define you permanently, and that extraordinary people exist everywhere if we have wisdom to see them. Today, Marcus's cleaning cart remains on display at the Smithsonian, a symbol of hidden potential. Aviation students study his case as proof that pilot skills remain dormant, not dead. His foundation has helped over 500 veterans return to flying, each carrying his message forward. Transglobal named their pilot training center after Marcus, where his photograph hangs in the entrance hall. Beneath it, a quote in his own handwriting reads, "I was the same person cleaning floors as I was flying planes. Only opportunity changed. Treat everyone as if they might save your life someday, because they might." Flight attendants at Transglobal still tell new hires about the janitor in the cockpit, reminding them that heroes do not announce themselves. They wear ordinary clothes and do ordinary jobs until extraordinary moments call them forward. And when those moments come, character matters more than credentials, courage matters more than currency, and heart matters more than height on any corporate ladder. Marcus Webb proved that night, and every day after, that we are not defined by our lowest moments but by how we rise when given the chance. His story will fly on forever, inspiring generations to look beyond uniforms and see the human potential that exists in every person, waiting for its moment to soar.